So, when did you first hear about the camp?
I first heard about it and came at the same time, which was on the Great Peace March, when the Women's Collective of the Great Peace March came to the camp. We came for a weekend or something. And there were only a few people. Andrea Doremus was there at that point, and I don't remember who else. I just remember her. She's kind of unforgettable. And we stayed, I think we only stayed 2 days, and we did a big action. And what I remember was there was this one woman who came with us who wasn't part of the Women's Collective of the Peace March. She just kind of came along. We invited other women from the Peace March to come, and I remember there was this big counter demonstration, and they were screaming, "Dykes, Dykes," you know, and this woman went over to them and said, "You can talk to me, I'm not a lesbian." and then we spent the rest of the time we were there processing. Like, that was all we did, like, after that one thing, and like talking to her and trying to explain women's space, and that was the rest of the time we were at the peace camp. We were processing that one event. Great Peace March walked from LA to Washington, D.C. via New York, and I only started in Chicago, so I don't, I know the lore of the other 6 months, but only the last 3.5 months is my story. What happened was there was a huge, like, it was a big corporate thing, and then in 3 weeks into the march, it broke down in Barstow in the middle of the desert. The repo people came to take everything away, and they left the people there with like one big truck and a few vehicles, and that was it. And 600 people out of the 3,000 who started, I think, stayed and reorganized, or 450 people stayed and reorganized, and did it on a low budget March of the People kind of thing, and then kept walking. I think they were in Barstow for a few weeks, kind of trying to get themselves together again, and then kept walking and walked all the way across the country talking to people about nuclear disarmament. And from that, a women's collective emerged. There were the way that it was set up is tents had been donated by I don't remember, some big tent company. And they were all different colors, and they were originally supposed to be villages, but then people reorganized into villages, so there was a village called Dyke Heights, and that village, was the Women's Collective, basically, and they stayed a village all the way through the march, and I, in Chicago, joined that village. I heard about the Peace March from a very unfortunate event. I had just broken up with a lover, and she and I were trying to be friends, and we decided we would go for a 2-week drive across America or something like that. And I was going to the Michigan Women's Festival, and it was the night before the Women's Festival, and I had just graduated from college, and I had no plans, no job, no anything. And she called me the night before I was leaving for the festival and said, instead of going for the 2-week drive, why don't we join the Peace March, which I had no idea what that even was. And so I said, okay. And then I thought to myself when I hung up, but as long as I'm going to join, I'm not going to just join for 2 weeks. I'll just see if I like it, and if I like it, I'll stay. So I did. I stayed. I had been doing Middle East stuff. I had always been active in the peace movement in the Middle East and socialist stuff. I was a part of something called the Progressive Zionist Caucus, and that, which was trying to get justice into the Zionist agenda, and so I had been part of that, and I'd always, that group that I was part of was very left, and so we were out there doing some anti-nuclear demonstrations and stuff like that, but nothing big. This was the first thing that I had done that I think that was this major. I mean, it was all highlight. There was no low light about it. You'd get up, you'd sleep in a tent first, but we're outside all the time. You'd get up in the morning, you'd hear women slowly getting up around you and unzipping their tents, talking to each other. It was, at that point, it was summer into late fall, so it was kind of getting cold toward the end of it, but there was just something about getting up every morning and walking for 20 miles, and on the way you would meet the whole point of the Peace March was to just talk to people. So that's all you had to do. So you'd just meet people on the road, you'd go into Dairy Queen, you'd have a conversation, anywhere, you'd just keep having conversations about nuclear arms and nuclear disarmament. It was just amazing. It was the best outreach I've ever done. It was so much fun. And you were clothed, you were fed, you got to meet great people. It was beautiful. It was a beautiful time of life. And the women who walked on it, I think, are probably still my closest connections. I'm going to San Diego next week and meeting with 5 of them. I'm still in close touch with them, and it was amazing. I don't know how to do highlights from that. It's hard to do, I mean, I guess, okay, here's one. I remember walking into Harlem, and we were warned about how bad Harlem is, and I was on security. That was my job on the march. So I did security, and we had an extra meeting for security for lest something terrible happen in Harlem. So we're on security in Harlem, and what happens that night? We're sitting around a fire, and all of these people from Harlem come food and hang out with us all night, and it was just amazing. We were in Harlem for 4 nights, I think, or 3 or 4 nights, and then we went into this all-white rich neighborhood the following night, and that was where we camped. And that night, for some reason, I was on security again. I'm not sure why, but that night people were throwing glass at our trucks. They were it was horrible in this perfectly nice, rich neighborhood, right, of all white people. And it just, that contrast was so striking. I will never forget it. Just the way that they had built it up for us, and then the way that it played out in actuality. And it was a really good life lesson for me. I mean, not that I was afraid of the Harlem thing to begin with, but it was that stark contrast of what really happened on the ground. So that was a highlight. And then the Peace Camp was a highlight. I mean, I had never had any contact with anything like this before in my life, and the Peace March was the first that I had, and then to come to Women's Land and see this place that, first of all, I mean, it wasn't just that it was Women's Land, it was that, for me, it was a place where any woman could come. And that was the most striking thing about it for me, that there was such an equality of access. I mean, clearly not in retrospect, but at that point, it just felt like anyone can come here. That's an amazing thing. I think in some ways, my eyes were wide open at that point, from the Peace March to the Peace Camp, and I was 22 or something, 23. So just everything was new, and everything was open, and for me, I had such a craving for justice, and it just felt like a place where that was actually being addressed. No, I had never heard of the Peace Camp before we got there, and I just went for the fun. I think what it was Wild Women for Peace, which is the band that I was in, had a concert in Syracuse or something like that, and we made it all go together. So I think I was even not even going for the Peace Camp. I think I was going for the Wild Women for Peace concert. And Wild Women for Peace was the Peace March women's band. And I don't know how I got in. It's because it was a very tight group. It was what do you mean, this newbie, person from, but somebody put me in, and I was way too shy to put myself in. It was just all kinds of political anti-nuclear music. The best song on that tape, I think, is called Missile Envy Rap, and it's a song that it just says it all. You have to listen to the tape. Some generated from the march, Missile Envy Rap generated from the March. Some of the stuff was written. Some of the stuff is just a rewriting of, like there's one called It's a Real World After All, which is obviously a play on It's a Small World. That got generated on the March, but obviously the music is not original. And then some stuff, I think, like Trace's stuff, came in with her, I'm pretty sure. So it was both. It was a real mixture. It was the person who kind of directed it, at least toward the end, was a woman named Liz Merrick, who died in the Pan Am crash over Lockerbie. But she was, at least toward the end, I can't remember if she was directing it at the early part when I was there, but when the recording was done, she was the person who put it all together and told us when to sing louder and when to sing softer, and she was fabulous. She was an amazing woman who just kind of she was just full of talent and full of enthusiasm and very opinionated. She was great. I think Moira and Val might have already been there, although I'm not 100% sure, because there were times when it was just me and her, me and Eli, me and him. So confusing, this gender stuff. So I don't really know. What I know, I remember Trish in particular, because Trish, I had a history with Trish because Trish had called me up at some point after Wild Women had broken up, but before, I don't even remember, but she had called me up and she had said, I'm going to be in Toronto and I was wondering if you're playing anywhere. She called me up at home in Toronto and I had said, I said, you, me or Wild Women? And she said, no, you. And I was like, no, but I'd be happy to meet you for coffee. So I met Trish when she was 16 years old with her best friend. They had come to Toronto or something for a visit, and we met at a park bench down in some park in Toronto and hung out, found out we had the same birthday. And then she showed up at the Peace Camp to live there for the time that I was there, and it was just, she was great. And she was 16, I mean, we were kind of her sponsors, her whatever, I don't even know what. She was like, her school had let her come, and Moira's school also, I think Moira was also there from school. Yeah.
Do you remember what winter was like your first winter there?
I remember being around the wood stove a lot, the 5 of us, or possibly 6.
Yeah.
So I remember when it was the 5 of us, I remember we got along really well. We had a whole system of, like, a whole setup there. We had no food, no money. I remember that one night Val was our cook a lot of the time, and Val made us, remember we had those big, like, containers of army ration, like, what are they called? Those
government
issued, like, huge things. And all we had left was one of those containers of ketchup. And I remember that Val made us ketchup soup one night because that was all there was on the shelf, and there's no checks coming in, and like that was it. So we ate ketchup soup for that night. It was good. So I remember, like, we really kind of tried to figure out day by day how we were going to live, and Laura Boswell would come and visit every once in a while and bring stuff up, and I remember that. And I remember there were some other Ithacans who would come up every once in a while, like Plowshares people, the Grady family. I don't know if you're going to interview them, but that's a place worth going. So the Gradys used to come up and do little actions, and so then we would have a little bit of food, I think. But there was definitely a time where it was really sparse pickings, and but it was good. Like when we sat down for dinner, we had a song that we would sing together before we ate dinner that Val and I made up, and like, there were just, we had ritual when the 5 of us were living there. It was it was a special time. It was a Christian hymn. And they'll know we are Christians by our love, right? And they'll know we are witches by our love, and they'll know we are witches by our love. We are one in the spirit, we are one in the earth, we are one in the spirit, we are one in the earth. And together we'll celebrate the goddess's rebirth, and they'll know we are witches by our love, and they'll know we are witches by our love. And then there was a line about the workers who had given us the food that was on our plates. I can't remember what it was. Val will know all of this, because Val had an unbelievable memory for every song ever sung at the Peace Camp. Who was it? Me and Moira and I had... We named each other. I was, as a joke, because everybody else, right? I was Raging Moss.
You were Raging Moss.
We heard about Raging Moss.
I don't remember what Moira was, but it was equally as ridiculous. I can't believe somebody remembers that.
So, in the wintertime, what was life like on a daily basis?
It was cold. But it wasn't, we did a lot of sitting around. It really was a lot of sitting around there. Eli and I would walk to the base. I think we tried to walk to the base once a day, and just to engage whoever was there in conversation. There was one guard that we actually got to be friendly with, like he got to know us, and but there wasn't much to do at the base except for engage the one guard in conversation. It wasn't like every once in a while they would send out their, trucks. But we couldn't figure out why or how. So mostly we just kind of tried to survive and keep the camp up. That was really what we were doing there. And, I remember a lot of sitting around. Doing a ton.
Did you have lots of discussions, radicalizing, politicizing, spiritualizing discussions?
Yeah, we did. And then we also had like Raging Moss kind of discussions, where just like complete silliness and stuff. And I think we craved visitors. There was something really nice about people coming, because it got lonely to be just us. And then there was a point, I remember when Eli and I were there by ourselves, and that, again, it was nice. Like we got along really well. It wasn't hard to live there by ourselves, but we definitely had, it was nice when people came in. We did the mail, we did the, like just the general upkeep kind of stuff, right? But there wasn't a lot to do, and there's not a lot that you can do when you're just one person or two people or a few people. So winter was very slow. I remember one day, the other thing that was going on at that point was there was all that zapping going on. So there were times when I was really sick, when I literally couldn't get out of a seat. It was sitting around because it was hard to move, not because there was nothing to do. And that happened. I think that that it got to that point more toward the end of the time that I was there than it was at the beginning. I don't think it was so much like that the first winter that I was there. The second winter it was much more like that.
When you say zapping, how did you come to know about that, or what was your understanding of that initially?
I don't remember how I came to know about it. What I remember is, what I know is that, it got very serious and we were doing a lot of investigation of it, and I went down to New York to talk to 2020, and so it got pretty serious, and that again was toward the end of the time that I was there, if I remember right, and somebody else might remember better. That was a scary time. That was probably the scariest part of the whole Peace Camp experience, was that whole zapping thing, and not just being sick, which was also scary, but also, there was one time when I was going to do some zapping work. I don't even remember. I was driving to Buffalo or something. We were meeting scientists in Buffalo at some point or something like that. And I was driving to Buffalo, and my car blew a tire, and the guy at the repair shop said that it could easily have been fixed, like that someone could easily have done that on purpose, made it blow, and things like that. It got kind of frightening at times. But so what I remember is that we were doing a lot of documenting, we were doing a lot of investigation. I learned more about science in that year that we were doing that work than I ever wanted to know. How physics and how waves and stuff work together, which I couldn't tell you a thing about anymore, but how waves combine to form new waves, and how the body works, and how those things work on the body, and I just remember accumulating a ton of information. I mean, file boxes full of stuff. I think we filed FOIA at one point on that stuff, and found out from FOIA that they were developing this weaponry that used electromagnetic radiation in order to manipulate people's bodies and minds in order to do crowd control and stuff like that. I think we got that from FOIA, and then we also filed FOIA on the peace camp in England, which is where we got most of the original information from, is from that peace camp. I remember that for me, I was there was a period of a couple months where I was sleeping 20 hours, and I would wake up for a few hours a day, and then I would just go back to sleep. There was one time that I experienced an incredible panic of paranoia, which other people also experienced on the land. We started to learn how to walk them off the land. If they were feeling something like that, just grab them and take them away, and then it would just calm right down. But so that was that happened to me once. It didn't happen to me ever again. And then there were also, I remember you could walk on the land, and you would get to certain places where you would feel your body differently. Like there was the mound that was between the two
Amazon and Heartland.
Right.
Between Heartland and Amazon.
Right. And you would walk up the mound, and
all of a sudden
stuff would happen to you that
Yeah.
You'd feel kind of nauseous or sick, or like you couldn't move, or your mind would do weird things. It was and you could feel it. You could actually feel the difference. And I remember testing people by just taking them on a walk around the land and not telling them anything about it, and just kind of seeing where people got freaked out. And it was all you could just watch it happen. When you got onto that mound, you could watch it happen. There were a couple of spots like that. So there were all kinds of things. And then there was a period of a month where we rented a machine, which was in my room, and I would just, and it was like this secret room, nobody was allowed in there, and I would just play with the machine. Nothing ever. We never got anything from it. I think we didn't quite know how to use it, quite honestly, but we spent hundreds of dollars to rent this thing, I think, and we had gotten it from those people in Buffalo, from these scientists in Buffalo, and they had told us that it was illegal to make these machines that test for certain frequencies, and so it felt like I was involved in major espionage. It was a strange time. We had to meet in the women's bathroom at Cornell. We wouldn't say where we were meeting ahead of time. We would set it up at the last minute. And then there was, I remember during that same time, I remember one night, this woman woke up in the morning with burns on one side of her face, like a sunburn on one side of her face. And she had been sitting by the window the night before, and then that next morning she was burned. And then I remember I remember nights where everybody would wake up at exactly the same time of night on different parts of the land, like usually 4 o'clock in the morning, if I remember. And then I remember this other thing that happened where, and I don't remember if this was connected to the zapping thing, but I remember where Val had a conversation, I think it was Val, I'm pretty sure it was Val, had a conversation on the phone, put down the phone, picked up the phone to make another phone call, and heard her own conversation played back to her on the phone. You know, like things like that. Or just was just like, all right, we get it, thank you. You know, goodbye. So like I remember like all kinds of things like that where we'd be talking about let's go do an action, and then we'd get to the front gate and there would be all the trucks waiting for us. So like things like that where it was just so clear that they were listening to us. Or and then there was all this stuff that I remember about what do we do. Like we would have conversations about the fact that one of us was probably an infiltrator, and how do we hang out with that? Like, you know, what do we do knowing that one of us is probably an infiltrator? And then Bird arrived at some point. Bird was a woman from the base. I think she was enlisted. I'm pretty sure she was enlisted. And she was, because she decided to leave. She like talked to a few of us on the other side of the fence and decided that she didn't want to be in the army anymore. She like wanted to defect, and she came to live at the camp. And but I remember that there was like, at that point there was like, well, is she the infiltrator? Like, is she going back to the base and telling them everything we're doing? Like, but I also remember there being a real commitment to not care. You know, to say, probably's happening, we're just going to treat everybody like we're all who we are, and go with that. And I remember there being a commitment, and I think that, actually, I remember that coming from you. And I remember you setting the tone for that. That this is, you know, whatever. If there's an infiltrator, there's an infiltrator. We're not doing anything, we're not telling everybody that we're doing anyway, and that's just going to be the way it is. I remember moments of, I learned nonviolence from you. That I remember moments of, you know, being at something we were doing at the gate, and just watching you interact with a guard or something with the utmost respect. You know, that you both asserted that we were doing what was right, and this is what we needed to be doing, and that you respected them, who they were in the world. And for me, that was the paradigm of nonviolence. And I had that in my heart, but I didn't know how to act it out until I saw you do it. Like, I didn't know how to be that. I knew that I felt that, but I didn't know how to be it. And there, I mean, like I said, when I'm in Palestine and facing these soldiers who are sometimes, like, what's interesting in Palestine when I do my work is that I'm one of the people, often I'm in a group of people who don't know Hebrew or Arabic. And I don't know Arabic, but I know Hebrew, so I can tell what the soldiers are saying. And sometimes the things that they're saying are so painful to hear. And like to keep, like I think about those moments with you, like of like how would you respond to this if you were here and you were understanding what they're saying? And so it's just, it was very profound. I think you and Cindy were my main teachers at the Peace Camp. Cindy was the same. Cindy had this way of, I mean, she did it differently, but she had this way of just getting down to the dirt, you know? Like, it was like, I'm just gonna do it. She just did it. She didn't mess, wasn't into the whole processing thing as far as I remember. She just kind of went and did the stuff that needed to be done. And she had that same kind of no nonsense, this is what has to be done, this, you know, this is the right thing way of going about stuff, but this gentleness that went with it, that just felt like, you know, we were young, and I feel like we were in our 20s, like, you know, and just watching you and Cindy do that, achieve the same goal that we were looking at achieving without that. Yeah. So here's the other place where you pulled me through, okay? I was writing my dissertation for 3 horrible years, okay? Horrible years. And during the whole time, I was thinking to myself, I wasn't doing any activism. I was thinking, I'm never gonna get back to my activism. How am I ever gonna do this? I'm gonna be chained to this system of, I'll get to it after I finish the, fill in the blank, and then the next thing happens, and then the next thing happens, and I'm constantly saying to myself, I'll do it when, and your voice was in the background, because there you were doing activism. You were like, what, in your late 40s at that point, something I'm coming up too fast, and you were doing it, and I just kept thinking, no, Estelle did activism later. You can go back to this, and that's how I got to Palestine. I made myself a commitment. As soon as I finish this dissertation, I'm going back to being a full-time activist for a while, and that's how I went there. And it was by remembering that, by knowing that I was not going to grow out of this like everybody else. It was not going to be something that I did in my 20s. What things inform my life today? The community piece of it. On the harder side, the hard part of what happened to me in the peace camp is kind of where I am today, happened, which is like encountering anti-Semitism, which was really hard and painful and intense, and made me at one point say I'm leaving. And it was Eli who got me to the other side of the I'm leaving. There was one person who was just outwardly and constantly
baiting,
abusive to me, right? Baiting me, right? And nobody who was calling her on it. There was, at least not in front of me. And so it was incredibly isolating to be the Jew on the land who was just constantly, not an hour went by where some comment didn't come in about me as a Jew or Israel or something. This woman decided she wanted to create a Holocaust memorial in the backyard of the peace camp, and she built this. It was actually quite a powerful memorial. She took a pole and she surrounded it with barbed wire, and she hung the symbols that are on the thing that they made them wear in the death camps. She hung those symbols on the barbed wire. So there was a black triangle for prostitutes and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
There was no yellow star on the pole. And I said to her, there's no yellow star. And she said, we didn't have yellow.
Oh.
That's 6 million people you just dismissed because you didn't have yellow. You couldn't go down to the grocery store. I mean, obviously they had yellow. It wasn't an issue if we didn't have yellow. But it was that moment of having a Holocaust memorial out in the backyard of my home. I lived there, and having no recognition that Jews were killed was so horrifying to me, and nobody said anything, so I was going to leave. For some reason, I don't know why, I remember a tent. Oh, maybe it was Elizabeth's tent, because I think I was in the house the whole time, but I remember sitting with Elizabeth in this tent and her saying, well, instead of leaving, why don't you do something active about it? And at that point, I decided to crochet myself a kippah. And so I crocheted myself a kippah with little labrises and double women symbols all around it and my name, and I started wearing the kippah. And because so that I could be like, well, if you're gonna say anti-Semitic things, you should know who you're saying them to, right? And so I started wearing this kippah, and then it generated all these conversations with people, like random people that on the street, about, oh, I didn't know women could wear a kippah, or I was a Jew once, but then I left because it was so sexist, or things like that. And I started to think, God, there's a place for like being, bringing people in, like saying, no, you can actually be a feminist and a radical and a Jew at the same time. And that kind of landed me where I am. So in some ways, it was all thanks. May she be blessed forever after for it. So that, yeah, there you have it. That was I think one of the things that informed me most. And then I learned about consensus there. Never tried that before. I mean, I guess I had learned it at the Peace March, sort of, although we didn't really have to come to any major decisions there. But the Peace Camp, that was a place where you had to really figure things out with people, and so I learned that there.
So what about spirituality?
I was trying out the like pagan thing when I was at the Peace Camp, and here's how I talk about it now when I talk about Judaism, because when I'm talking about Judaism, I'm usually talking to people who are in a lot of pain about how incredibly difficult Jewish tradition is. It's like it's misogyny, and it's it's just, you can't look at it and go, oh, that's nice. Like there's nothing like that. I mean, there are pieces of it that do that, but there are pieces of it that contextually it's much more complicated than that. And so I'm usually talking to those people about it. And what I talk about is, when I was at the Peace Camp, I was doing the pagan thing, and it was beautiful. I mean, there's no question, like, for me, that the rituals that we had there were beautiful. But I couldn't get my teeth into anything. Like, it felt like it was all good. And there was no, like, charge to it for me. There was nothing that I could grapple with. Like, there was nothing to grapple with. It was just all good. And so, didn't work for me. So on one hand, I loved having it, and I loved watching it happen. But for me, I think about the stories that work for me in the Jewish tradition, and they're like they're horrifying. They're like terrible stories. Like Abraham takes his son up on the mountain and tries to sacrifice him until God, right? Like, that's the stuff that has the power for me, because I can go, what's happening in there? Like, what parts of my subconscious are being spoken to in this, and that wasn't happening for me at the camp. Like, I felt like it was missing for me to have something that was hard in my religion or in my spirituality. Like, it felt like hardness about it was part of it, and I couldn't find it there. So what worked was, it was just, meeting all those women who you'd never meet, who would just show up at your doorstep one day, and you never knew how long they were going to stay. They could come for a day and then be there 3 months later, or they could just leave, and you never knew. And in my 20s, that was an adventure. That was great. There are certain women I remember very clearly, and like the impact that they had. Like, some women would just come and hang out, and but some women would come and work, and they would come with so much energy, because they weren't living there, so they would be just like, oh, this floor. I remember the kitchen floor. I don't know, it must have been a 4 or 5 day period where Jessica Doremus and her lover, Jacinthe, came, and we just redid the kitchen floor that 5 days, because they came in with all this energy to work, and things like that were just amazing, just to watch women get charged by being there and then go, do stuff. And so that was a blast. And then the things that didn't work for me, and I don't think this is because they intrinsically don't work. But it was hard to never know if I was gonna... I like my space. So for me, I had my own room a lot of the time because there were very few of us on the land, and so I had that little room, and then when we were doing the zapping stuff, nobody was allowed in there anyway. But for a lot of the time that I was there, I never knew if tonight I was going to have a roommate or not, and that was tough. And then there was, there was one woman on the land who stole stuff, and that was tough. To like all of a sudden not have your stuff anymore. I mean, Val's camera got stolen, and we all kind of knew who it was, and nobody was willing to confront it, and that was hard. It was hard. It was both great and terrible having women be able to just show up and be there, because it meant you always had new women, and you were always meeting new women, and it was a place, like I said, there was an equality of justice about accessibility, and you always had new women. Some of them weren't too pleasant to be around, and you couldn't do anything about it. Like, there was no way, it was an equality. So if they wanted to be there, they could. If they wanted to be in your room, they could. If they wanted to be on your bed, they could. And that was tough at times, especially at times when you had women who were clearly not there for any other reason except for they didn't want to go anywhere else and they wanted to get taken care of. And that happened from time to time. Didn't happen all that often, but it happened from time to time. And those were hard times at the camp.
Yeah.
And painful, hard times. Like, living a day during those times was hard work. And so that was, so it both worked and didn't work. The same thing worked and didn't work, depending on who was there, which I guess is true of everything, that it works or doesn't work depending on who's doing it. So that was part of it. And then consensus didn't always work so well, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, again, I wouldn't give it up, but sitting for 4 hours to decide some stupid little detail is just not my idea of good use of time, especially if we want to change the world. It was just not worth it. And so things like that was tough at times. And then at other times, again, it was an amazing process watching. If the people sitting in that room were good at it, then it was amazing. If there was one person who was bad at it, or who was intentionally disruptive, then it was torture, and you could never get through it. You could never get through it, and that was tough. But the other thing was the way that sex happened at the peace camp was hard for me. There was a way in which I didn't feel like my boundaries were always respected, and that was tough. And I think that was kind of about where we were and how old most of us were and stuff like that. I think that played into it a lot, but that was hard for me. There were a few times that I can remember where I felt like I had been crossed in ways that were really uncomfortable. And so I think those were the things that I would say were the hard pieces. But no, and I'm not sure why, because stuff did happen when we were on. I remember coming home one time when we had left for a couple of days and no one was on the land, and coming home and finding a bullet hole in the front door. And and they had cut our water line once or something. I can't remember exactly. They cut something on the land. A couple of times they slashed our hammock once to pieces. But for some reason, I never had any bad interactions with any of the people in the town. I always had pleasant interactions with them, if I was walking to the store or whatever. So I didn't actually feel afraid. I felt like we were really okay. Like,
Mm-hmm.
nothing was really going to happen to us. I don't know why. I mean, I guess
Yeah.
naivete, maybe. I felt afraid of the people zapping us.
Mhm.
Like, I felt like they were really a threat.
Yeah.
Like, they were hurting us.
Right.
But I didn't feel like that from any of the people on the base, like as individual people on the base. Like, I always had really pleasant conversations with people on the base.
Uh-huh.
You know, when I went
Yeah.
to the fence and someone was there, I had nice interactions. Like,
Yeah.
you know, we were talking about their kids, and
Mhm.
we weren't having, so I didn't really. More women were in and out during the summer, and I was more out during the summer, actually. By that point, I was starting to do zapping work, so I was off the land gathering information at a bunch of different places, so it didn't feel so much like, I mean, I felt like it was coming home, but it felt like there was stuff happening there without me, and it was more, it was looser, and it didn't feel so much like it was my camp. You know, like, there was a way when the 5 of us were there, it was like our home. You know, we were building it, we were making it together. And when it was, when I was off the land so much, and then there were other people on the land so much, it was a different feeling about it for me. Toward the end, I was so sick that most of the zapping committee was telling me I needed to leave. So, and I, at some point, said, "Yeah, you're right. This is not helping anybody." So I left.
And sickness that you felt was a result of being at the camp?
That I knew was a result of being at the camp. And it was very clear. It's interesting because I had what they like called chronic fatigue syndrome. But when we were doing all this research, it turned out, like, if you line up the list of chronic fatigue syndrome symptoms and the list of EMR poisoning symptoms, they're identical. So, you know, it was pretty clear that what was happening was a direct result of the zapping, and you know, the longer I stayed off the land, the better I got. So I definitely felt like there was no question that it was directly related. I feel like it gave me a place to learn about myself. You know, it gave me a place to kind of be whoever I needed to be at that moment, and not have to worry about who I needed to be. Like, that's how I feel like it was different than any other experience I've had since. Is the Peace March and the Peace Camp. I just got to be Sarra and figure out what that was like. You know, without the expectations of, oh, you need to be appropriate, or you need to be, you know, professional, or you need to be whatever it is that I'm supposed to need to be in any given situation. I didn't need to be anything. I mean, I needed to be radical, but I was, and so that worked. And I just felt like, and that was life-changing for me, like, to just be in that. And it was also just fun. I mean, it was hard, but it was fun. Woody told me, because I saw Woody right before this summer when you guys were all planning on meeting, and I was planning on going to the meeting, which then got changed, and then I was going to be in Israel. So, so that's when I heard that Woody told me at that point.
Yeah.
Oh, I was so sad. I just felt like, you know, it's like a storybook almost, you know, where this thing, where it's like one of those depressing Dr. Seuss kind of things, where it's like there was this heyday, you know, it's like what's that one? It's like it tells the story about how there was a wonderful place with all these trees, and then the whole story, it's an environmental one that tells, and how this guy came in and he just cut down all the trees in order to make his little sweaters and things, and then there are no trees, and it's just like kind of like this. That's how I felt. like this was filled with thousands of women, and it's like I felt so sad. It was so dejected, you know. I think if we had like gotten it together to create something else out of it, you know? A really cool orphanage, or, you know, something, you know, something fabulous that do something for people. Because obviously we don't need it anymore to protest the base, so, like, something else that's going to change the world. Not some guy's land.
Drill for